We do have our guests here now, fam.
Yeah. It's perfect that you just, we did this section because we can lead right into it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Ritter is with the Convo Couch today. Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you guys?
Great.
We're doing good. We're hanging in there. I mean, this is at any given moment, any one of us could be taken off YouTube, could be taken off Twitter, could be, I just wanted to start by asking you, you were suspended twice. You were suspended the first time and they gave you back your Twitter account. And then you were suspended again. Did they give you a reason as to why? Is this a permanent suspension?
Well, I was suspended the first time for a tweet that I posted on April 6th about the war crime that took place in Bucha. The problem is I wasn't buying into the narrative. I was pointing the finger at the Ukrainian National Police, where all of the available data leads you to. I mean, there's literally nothing that says Russia except the Ukrainian government. All the data, all the evidence says Ukrainian National Police. So I was suspended. I appealed, they lifted it, and then they suspended me again, this time for a tweet that I wrote on April 3rd. So they went backward. And also about Bucha. And this time the suspension is permanent. They informed me this morning that I am permanently removed from Twitter, and that's just the way it is.
This all started back in 2000. You know that. A lot of people don't know that when you were so vocal about what was going on in Iraq. I never forget that stuff. I mean, that's when I first learned about Scott Ritter. However, I want to kind of talk about what's going on. Unless, fam, did you want to talk more about censorship, or should I just dive into some war questions? I'm sorry if you want to piggyback off that.
No, I mean, I guess this is all part of it, right? You're not buying the narrative. And it's not even that you're just not buying it. It's the narrative has so many holes that anybody could, with any sort of, that takes any time at all, can see that the narrative is wrong. So if you want to go ahead and dive into what we're just talking about,
can I add just one quick thing to that? But I'm not tooting my own horn. But I'll tell you this: when the U.S. government comes out with some information, that information is derived from allegedly an analytical process that we call intelligence, from the intelligence community. I was the intelligence community. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was trained to do what they do, and I did it very well. I got 2 classified commendations for the director of the CIA for my analytical work. I called it right in Iraq during the Gulf War. I called it right pretty much my entire professional career. I called it right to the embarrassment of those who were calling it wrong. So when I come out and commit to something, it's only after an assiduous process of evaluating the data in its totality. This isn't some knee-jerk reaction from some pro-Putin, wannabe. I'll put my professional intelligence credentials up against anyone, and bar none. So when I say that the evidence points to the Ukrainian National Police, you can take that to the bank, because I wouldn't have committed to that unless I believe that I could have taken that to the president of the United States and made the same assessment.
Yeah. That's what I was kind of talking about too, as well. Your credentials, they're solid. Back in the days, I said, we shouldn't go into Iraq. There are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Who told you that? Scott Ritter did. He's the UN chief inspector over there. He's been going over there for a while. He says there's no weapons of mass destruction. There weren't, and you were right. But by proving yourself right, you proved a lot of big heads wrong, and they've been out to smear you, silence you, and it doesn't surprise me. The only thing I'm surprised about, Scott, is the fact that it took them so long to take you down. Are you a little surprised it took them this long after all the stuff you've been talking about when it comes to Ukraine and Russia?
First of all, I in order to answer that, I have to know exactly what their standards are. I believe that I have been operating well within the framework of 4 corners of what's permitted in Twitter. There is literally nothing in my tweet that exceeds the kind of rhetoric, 288 characters at a time, that other people put out there. In fact, other people out there calling for the death of Russians, the murder of Russians, wishing harm on people. I have done none of that, and yet I'm targeted for abusive behavior and harassment.
Yeah, you're targeted for exposing the empire. Let's be honest over here. That's what this is all about. Are you surprised, though, that this war has not kind of wrapped itself up? I mean, I remember some guys on the No Agenda Project before they were going on vacation a couple of weeks ago. They're like, this is going to soon be over. It looks like Russia's starting phase 2, and that was sending more troops on the ground. Why hasn't the war ended whatsoever? What's going on the ground?
Well, as Vladimir Putin said when he spoke the other day, we're not going to let your time frame drive our military operation, meaning all those people saying, why aren't you going faster? He said, my number one concern is mission accomplishment. And then he said, the military is doing this operation in a very literate fashion. And that's Russian for by the book, meaning they're doing this, very methodically, professionally, with absolute assurance of the outcome. And he said, it's also imperative that we do not inflict needless casualties, both on our own troops and on those whom we are fighting. We're not out to murder anybody. So, I was one of the people that believed that if the Russians put the pedal to the metal, this thing could be over. But the cost in human life would be on a scale that Europe hasn't seen since World War II. And the Russian leadership has made a decision that that's not the route they're taking. And if that means that we have to spend a couple more calendar days talking about this war, that's our problem, not their problem. Russia doesn't march to the beat of the Western media drum. They don't care. They're simply going to do what they're going to do when they're going to do it. But the one thing we know is that Putin said this will not end until all of our objectives have been accomplished. He also said, I will not negotiate with those losers in Kiev. It's over. The time for negotiation is done. We are now going to do it our way. And when this ends, it'll not be because Russia negotiated anything away. It's because Ukraine will sign an unconditional declaration of surrender. Unconditional. Russia will dictate the terms. That's straight from the president of Russia's mouth. I believe him.
Yeah. Everything that Russia has said they would do or they have done has been proven right. But every single accusation from the West, you could go to Bucha, Kramatorsk, and the various accusations about the ghost of, or the existence of the ghost of Kiev, and etc. We could go down the list, have been found to be entirely false or have been poked. There have been enough holes poked in that. Now that the Western media is saying that Russia is once again using chemical agents in Mariupol, and they're saying that the Azov battalion are just far right volunteer groups, according to the New York Times. This is what they literally wrote in this article that we just went over. What do you make of that in terms of, when you juxtapose that with the denial of U.S. involvement in these biolabs and the whole mess with that? Who really has a history of using chemical agents and staging false flags here?
Well, we know that the United States has been susceptible to false flags. The most successful recent false flags involving chemical weapons has been carried out by the Syrian opposition, the jihadists, Al-Qaeda, the White Helmets. They staged a number of false flags, and the last one of which, in the town of Douma, resulted in French, British, and American aircraft and naval vessels firing cruise missiles and dropping bombs on Syrian infrastructure. Now, the interesting part is the Pentagon came out and gave a very detailed briefing about the targets they had. These were known facilities associated with sarin nerve agent, because one of the allegations being put forward is that the Syrian government used sarin nerve agent. So this is the sarin nerve agent production facility. This is the sarin nerve agent storage facility. This is the sarin nerve agent arming facility. And then it turned out that sarin nerve agent wasn't used. And now you're left wondering just what the heck was the U.S. government talking about, because apparently everything they briefed is absolute fact, turned out to be absolutely wrong. And now we have a situation here, because the U.S. government has been susceptible to this, because the Biden administration has declared a red line on chemical weapons, that you're going to start hearing multiple allegations coming out. The one in Mariupol is just literally an absolute joke. First of all, it comes from the Azov Battalion. They're not far right. They're Nazis. Okay, they're Nazis. They have swastikas tattooed on their bodies. They give the Hitler salute. They worship Hitler. They worship those who fought for Hitler. They're worse than whatever worst term you can possibly come up with. So, you know, right off the bat, they have a credibility problem. But they told a story. They said 3 guys. The Azov Battalion is buried under the ground right now in Mariupol. They've been digging for 8 years. And they've got a network of tunnels and all that. And there's some very interesting videos put out by the Russian military showing them clearing these tunnels. It's dangerous work, deadly, close-in fighting. And the Russians have drones overhead. And the drones look for movement because these Azov guys are leaving from one tunnel, moving, dropping into another. So 3 of them were making a move to a tunnel when a drone fired a missile. The missile exploded on the ground. Now, let me tell you a little bit about drones and missiles. Missiles have fuel. The fuel is a toxic substance, usually a solid material that, when it hits, will generally blow up along with the warhead. But oftentimes, the fuel doesn't blow up completely, creating a cloud of very caustic material that will cause your eyes to burn, your throat to burn, your nose to burn, your skin to burn. I know, because I've had it happen to me. And you know, and it's unpleasant. It's not a chemical weapons attack. So these guys said the drone fired a missile, it blew up, and they started feeling these symptoms. And so they were evacuated the hospital. Next thing we know, it's a chemical weapons attack. Yeah. Now, the United States, being a responsible superpower, should dismiss stories like this right off the bat, just not even give them life, not even breathe life. Nazis are saying that chemical weapons were used by misconstruing a drone missile attack on Nazis trying to run from one tunnel to the other. And suddenly we're treating it as if the innocent Ukrainian people are being subjected to genocidal acts by the brutal Russian occupier using chemical weapons. And yet, if you listen to the news on the media, that's the way it's portrayed. And then they repeat it afterwards. It's not, you know, what it really is. You have CNN, and they're using chemical weapons. MSNBC, they're using chemical weapons. It suddenly became a statement of fact, a reality. Now they don't even have to refer to the Nazis anymore. They just say, and they're using chemical weapons, and everybody nods their head going, yes, of course they are, because they're Russians. It's just absurd.
It's kind of crazy too as well. We have the Mujahideen, was one of the first radical groups we ever supported. I think I asked you last time on the show that you came on with the panel, is there a chance that this ideology will spread throughout Europe the same way that the Al-Qaeda and ISIS ideology is spreading throughout the world too as well? But what I want to ask you is, you understand this region pretty well. What causes one to join these Azov battalion groups, these Nazis? Because this is different than Hitler with a nation state, right? This is Ukraine and people kind of conforming to this ideology within a different nation state. Is it economics is the first thing that pushes people towards this radicalism?
Well, the radicalism we're talking about has its roots in the economic and social situations that gripped Europe, Central Europe, Germany, the Galatian region where Ukraine is then under Polish control. And it leads to, you know, this national socialism, that it's a combination of fascist ideology and economic power. And so, you know, the father of the Azov movement, Stepan Bandera, and some other Ukrainian nationalists were alive and well and living during this time. They resented the fact that the Ukrainian homeland had been given to Poland. And so they started resisting the Poles. And then in 1939, when the Russians took over Western Poland as part of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, Stepan Bandera's people started to resist the Russians. And then when the Germans invaded, they embraced the Germans as their liberators. And then they became one with the Germans. Over 80,000 of the Bandera fighters joined the Waffen-SS in the early weeks following the invasion. Hundreds of thousands joined over the course of 4 years. And they fought alongside the Germans as part of the Waffen-SS, as literally Nazi stormtroopers. They claim, not because they worshipped Hitler and Nazi ideology, but because they were able to resist the Soviets. And indeed, in 1944, when the Soviet Union started kicking the Germans out of the area, a lot of the people fighting for the Germans deserted, went to the woods, and started fighting the Soviets exclusively. But their ideology was the same. These people remember the glory of fighting for the 12th and 14th Waffen-SS Panzer divisions. And so they started adopting the symbology. They adopted the songs, the imagery, etc., the routine, the ceremony. And they did this while they fought the Soviets. It was a bloody fight. From 1944 to 1955, over 300,000 people were killed in this fighting. So it's not like this is minor. This is major. And the Soviets lost close to 40,000 army and security forces fighting these people. They were eventually defeated. Now, the CIA backed them the entire time. And keep this in mind. That means the CIA is backing known Nazi sympathizers. Why? Well, these guys were under the control of the 12th Department of German intelligence during World War II, meaning Nazi intelligence. And when the war ended, the CIA took over that whole department, just adopted it. So we took Nazis straight from wearing Nazi uniforms, and now they work for the CIA. Now they're directing pro-Nazi, anti-Soviet fighters. The CIA funded this organization up until 1990. And we helped enhance the spirit of nationalism, meaning that we helped breathe life into Stepan Bandera. But that's who these people worship today. They call it nationalism, but they're using the symbology and the routine and the ceremony of the Nazis. And it's unforgivable, especially as an American who had our grandfathers cross the Atlantic and sacrifice so much to defeat this hateful ideology. To have it now breathed back into life by the United States should disgust every patriotic American.
Yeah, if you're going to talk about patriotism in that sense, then yes, it's absolutely disgust. And by the way, it's like they're turning Russians into Nazis and turning the Nazis into victims, which is, it's entirely upside down world right now that we're in. I wanted to ask you too, since you have literally experience on the ground, logistical military intelligence, the narrative from the West is that Russia is, of course, losing this war. But when you look at any Russian map or any sort of map that's coming from non-Western sources, you can see that Russia is taking over control of many cities, including Mariupol. What is your assessment of the current state in terms of control between Russia versus Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that Russia is not fighting your traditional war of occupation. So anybody who's looking at a map and trying to determine success by the amount of territory captured, you're looking at the wrong metric. It's not about territory captured. It's about battlefield results, meaning dead Ukrainian soldiers. And the Russians are slaughtering them. I mean, I'm not bragging, I'm not gloating, but it's the God's honest truth. The Ukrainians don't stand a chance. They're being annihilated as we speak. Over 1,000 of them surrendered yesterday rather than to die in Mariupol. These were their elite Marines, some of the best fighters. But yesterday, the Russians carried out an attack on one of the mechanized brigades that's in Donbass. Over 150 guys were killed. This is happening multiple times a day, every day. The Russians are dominating this battle. And so what we're seeing on the map right now is that the Russians, having completed phase one, which was shaping the situation on the ground in Ukraine to their advantage, they're now moving to phase two, which is the isolation and destruction of the bulk of the Ukrainian army. And that's getting ready to happen. It's going to be a double envelopment with a pincer coming from the north, a pincer coming from the south. It's going to encircle 60 to 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and they are either going to die or surrender. There are no other options. It's over. It's all over. Now, Putin has said, it'll be over on our terms, meaning that Russia's not going to rush into an ambush. One thing we should have learned about this is that the Ukrainian soldiers are very good. Very good. They're well-trained, well-led, well-equipped. And given the chance, they will kill you, as they've proven many times when the Russians have made a mistake. So the Russians are going slow. They're going to use their superiority and firepower and maneuver capability, and they're going to take their time. and put the Ukrainians in an untenable position, then the Ukrainians have a choice to either fight or die or surrender. And I think you're going to see mass surrenders in the coming days. Mass surrenders.
Well, Scott, you know, you get censored. A lot of other people get censored. I think Gonzalo Lira was censored the other day too as well, fam. I'm not sure. Where do people get this information from? Because this is a totally different story from what's being told on the mainstream media. And with that being said, even though the Russians are going to take their time and do it on their time scale, it seems because they don't want to mess up a lot of the infrastructure, and they realize that the people have to go on with their lives after this element has been ruined. How long is this going to take then? You know, I mean, I know you said they're going to do it on their own terms, but from the story you just told, that seems like this should be over very shortly.
Well, I personally believe that the Ukrainian military has reached the end of its tether. And I think we're seeing evidence that every day. You know, early on in the war, you might have captured 8 Ukrainians. You might have captured 10 Ukrainians in isolated battles. Now they're capturing hundreds and now thousands every day. That means that the Ukrainian military has reached the end of its tether and they're starting to collapse. So I think this will be sooner rather than later. Now, you talk about where you get the sources. I don't mean to be facetious here, but when I was an intelligence officer, I would be fired if I briefed the President of the United States only by reading the Washington Post and New York Times and watching CNN. They would fire me. They said, well, then you're a journalist. I would have to go and get Russian sources, monitor the Ministry of Defense, monitor the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, monitor the Ministry of Industry, monitor the various entities that are posting. The head of the Chechen Republic, Kadrayev, puts out a very interesting and very informative link on his Telegram page. I monitor all of these. And by doing so, you get a feel for, you know, what the Russians are saying. Now, that doesn't mean that you just repeat what the Russians are saying, because that's not analysis. That's just journalism. I then take that back because they're not giving me the whole picture either. They're holding on to information. They're holding back. There's things they don't want to say. And then I have to rely on my own personal experience, my own expertise, and my knowledge of Russian doctrine, Russian military affairs, try and fill in the gaps and paint, you know, an accurate picture. Sometimes you get it all the way right. Sometimes you get it mainly wrong. You know, this is, you know, intelligence is an art, but, you know, generally speaking, if you do your job right, your conclusions are going to be taking you in the right direction. You might have a few deviations here and there. You know, if you thought that the war is going to be over in 2 weeks, well, you were wrong. But if you thought the war was going to be over in 2 weeks because Russia's going to win, well, then you were mostly right, because Russia's going to win.
In terms of what the Pentagon is doing, like in terms, because there's a lot of fear, and they weaponize that fear in Americans here, Americans that have never experienced imperialism from the same perspective as people in the global South or people in West Asia. There is this fear that perhaps this might escalate further. Do you see this conflict, in spite of Russia having the upper hand, in spite of Russia having the capabilities? Do you see that there are potential players within the Pentagon that are insane enough to want to wage full-out war with Russia and still consider Russians to be bluffing, because that's their narrative? Oh, Russia's just bluffing. We're sending more weapons. We're going to keep funding this even if Ukraine is failing. Do you see that there's a potential for a continued escalation?
If you remember back in the during the final months of the Trump administration, there were a lot of people that were coming up with crazy theories that Trump would start a nuclear war, that Trump could launch a nuclear weapon, et cetera. And General Milley, to his credit, you know, educated the American public on the actual processes involved in nuclear weapons authorization release. And simply put, no president can order nuclear war on his own. There has to be a system of constitutional checks and balances that relate to the law of war, issues of proportionality, et cetera, before weapons can be released. And military commanders are obligated by their oath to the Constitution not to execute an unlawful order. That's a long way of saying that the military is in charge here. The president is the president. The president can can issue an order, but that order will normally only be given after long consultation with the military and only after the appropriate, every I has been dotted and T crossed. So all these crazies that are talking about they're bluffing, et cetera, they're not part of the decision-making cycle. They don't have a vote. They're just simply blowing hot air at the American people from whatever platform they're at. The people that control nuclear weapons, the people that would employ nuclear weapons are a very, very serious crowd. And they take that job very seriously because we're talking about the end of the world. And so no one's going to enter that lightly. And I'm not worried about inadvertent nuclear war. What I am concerned about is inadvertent conventional war. That is for people thinking that the United States has more conventional capacity than it actually does, and they get us involved in a shooting conflict in Europe that we can't finish. I'm not going to denigrate the professionalism of the American soldier, but I will say this: we don't have enough of them, and they don't have enough equipment, especially for deployed in Europe. And if they get into a shooting match with the Russians, they will lose, and they will lose decisively. It'll be an embarrassment along the lines of Kasserine Pass in North Africa, or the initial battles that we fought in Korea. That doesn't mean that we're going to lose the war. Eventually, we could mobilize, we could get enough firepower over there to beat the Russians, but is that really what we want to be doing? The other thing that concerns me is this addiction we have to the expansion of NATO. What part of Russia will not tolerate the expansion of NATO to its borders do we not understand? Didn't Russia, we said, oh, Russia's bluffing. Russia doesn't bluff. They warned us that if we tried to bring in Ukraine, this is what's going to happen. We've known this since 2009. So why in God's name are we pushing Finland, of all countries, to join NATO?
Yeah.
The Finns know that in 1949, they signed a peace treaty that guaranteed the only reason why they're going to be allowed to live as a nation state with territory close to St. Petersburg, at the time Leningrad, was that they promised to be neutral and to never join a military alliance that could threaten. If Finland thinks for a second that Russia's going to sit back idly and let them join NATO, I'll tell you right now, Russia will destroy Finland to a degree greater than they're destroying Ukraine. Ukraine right now is a special military operation, meaning the gloves are on, they're going soft. If Finland seeks to join NATO, it will be destroyed as a modern nation state. The Russians cannot tolerate a NATO force literally right over the border from the second largest city, St. Petersburg. They can't tolerate a NATO force that can move across the peninsula and strike one of the heaviest concentrations of Russian military power in the Kola Peninsula. What are these guys smoking?
Yeah.
The Russians aren't bluffing, and they've said that. Russia has said this. They have said if Finland joins NATO, there will be a military tactical solution. The same terminology they use for Ukraine. So what do we think is going to happen? This is what scares me, that we have people that don't understand that Putin doesn't bluff, ever.
Yeah. And Sweden is now also getting into the mix, I believe, too, as well, right?
They don't share a border. So I'm not so much. Sweden could join NATO and Russia would just be angry.
But why would Sweden want to join NATO? That's my question. It just seems so odd. And that's going to be my last question because I have to get out of here for today. But why would Sweden even want to join NATO?
Well, this is what I don't understand, because first of all, there's a other part of it, because just because Sweden wants to join NATO doesn't mean that Sweden gets to be in NATO. Article 10 of the NATO Charter says that NATO will allow nations to join who qualify if, after consultation, NATO feels that them coming in would enhance the security of NATO. If you know that bringing in a nation is going to cause a war, how does that enhance NATO's security? So I hope that the issue of Swedish and Finnish membership will be debated hotly at the NATO summit this June in Madrid. And, we might have a surprise, because on April 24th, the French go to the polls and they may elect a lady called Marine Le Pen. I'm not a fan of her ideology. It's very far right wing, but Marine Le Pen has said she's not going to play this NATO game. She's not going to allow Europe to get involved in a war. And her goal is to be friends with Putin. So if Marine Le Pen is the president of France come June of this year, Sweden and Finland will never get into NATO, because that requires a consensus agreement, and France will not agree. And that might be the saving of the world. That might prevent another European conflict.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions before we get you out of here. One of the questions was, what are the economic impacts that you think could potentially worsen if Europe continues in this trajectory of putting loyalty before economic sense? Because what's going on with Russia is obviously hurting the EU. It's hurting Americans here at home. And what are the possible routes that this could take to where the European Union, European nations, and even the British Empire, Great Britain, the UK, could actually be impacted?
Well, let's just make it clear. Europe cannot survive without Russian energy. That's just a statement of fact. You can have Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, the president of the United States, and everybody else get up there and talk about how we're going to, wean Europe off of Russian energy, and we've got a plan. Europe, there is not enough energy in the world that is capable of being diverted to Europe in a timely and economically feasible fashion to compensate for Russian energy. That's just a statement of fact, too. All of the damage and harm that's been done to the European economy so far, and it's been real, has happened without Russia doing anything. Russia hasn't turned off the gas. Russia hasn't shut down the oil. They're still buying the gas, they're still buying the oil, but the mere threat of Russia shutting this down and the efforts to try and find alternative sources of energy have caused the European economy to tinker towards the abyss. I mean, they're moving in that direction like lemmings to a cliff. And if they continue to push the Russians will shut off the tap. And when that happens, that's literally all she wrote. The German industrials are already telling Chancellor Scholz that the German economy is going to be permanently damaged by this in a way that hasn't been seen since the end of the Second World War. That means that Scholz will no longer be the Chancellor of Germany. There's going to be, if he continues down this path of self-suicide, he will be voted out of office, no confidence vote. And then Germany's going to be left struggling on what to do because they've committed to NATO, but they can't survive by keeping the NATO line. And all of Europe is going to be torn between, caught in the horns of this dilemma. Do they continue to maintain the artifice of unity based upon a tune that the United States is playing? Or are they going to look to their own self-interest and realize that if you want people to have a job, if you want to have a healthy economy, you need to basically walk away from NATO and the United States because they're only leading you in a direction of trouble.
A lot of people are under this impression that that Russia is, this conflict, that Russia is not necessarily opposing this international global order that has been talked about with the World Economic Forum via the Great Reset. Do you think that Russia is actually pushing back against this global order, or do you think it's just more of a separate thing entirely, or do you think this is just part of the part of the play of the whole global agenda?
Well, first of all, Russia and China have already said they're not playing that game. What we call the rules-based international order is over. Russia and China said it's done, we're not playing, and you can't have economies of those size and the scope and their influence in the world walking away and have this rules-based order that's been in place to guarantee American hegemony since the end of the Second World War survive. So it's over. Ladies and gentlemen of the United States of America, your moment in the sun where you dominated the world, could bully everybody, is over. It's finished, gone. What do you want the proof? Remember all those sanctions that Biden said will knock Russia out? Like Rocky Balboa punching whatever, Ivan Drago. Well, it's like Balboa swung and hit himself in the face because Biden didn't collapse the ruble. Ruble's stronger than ever. Biden didn't collapse the Russian stock market. It's alive and well and living. Biden didn't drive the Russian economy into the dirt. Their inflation rate, unlike ours, is dropping. The Russians have survived, and they survived by divorcing themselves from the West. Any notion that Russia's going to return and allow the West to come back in to work is over. Russia will never again work with the dollar. They will never again work with the euro, and they will never again work with the West. That doesn't mean that they can't have some trade, but the day of Russia bending over backwards to try and be a member of the Western economy is over, which means Russia is now working with China to create what's called the Trans-Eurasian Economic Union. This is a cooperative that will eventually have 2/3 of the world's population and around 60% of the GDP. You know who's going to be the minority in the world soon? America. You know who else? Europe. And Europe's going to divorce itself from America because you can't stick with a loser forever. And America right now is a loser. Soon, America's sphere of influence is going to be the United States, Canada, and Great Britain. That's it. Mexico ain't playing. Mexico's already walked away. Central America remembers the history of American imperial conquest. They're not going to play. South America's already rejected it. From Venezuela down to Argentina, they've said no, take a hike, Uncle Sam. Africa's playing with China. Asia's playing with China and Russia. We got no more playmates. It's over. It's finished. You can have the Wall Street Journal write whatever they want. You can have the Economist pay somebody, $13,000 to write a 25,000-word essay. The essay is meaningless unless it addresses this reality. Everything else is just hot air and propaganda. It's over. We lost. Russia wins. China wins. I'm not happy about this, but it's just a statement of fact. We blew it.
And lastly, I wanted to get your quick take on the ousting of Imran Khan as prime minister and then the subsequent protesting going on. Is there a chance that he could be the one to actually take the country into a new era where they're not as controlled or impacted by constant Western U.S. backed coups?
There is a chance. I mean, if he can survive, it's a very, Pakistani politics are rough and tumble, and I don't mean that lightly. People die. We saw that with Bhutto's daughter, and people get arrested and people get imprisoned. And Khan right now is a man who threatens, the establishment. He threatens the army. He threatens the intelligence services. He threatens the judiciary. He threatens the corrupt Pakistani business interest. And so he may not live, but if he does, one of the things about these ousters is that while the Pakistani courts and the Pakistani army didn't agree with Khan's interpretation of what the U.S. influence was meant to do, the Pakistani people know. You can fool them only so many times, and if they rise up and they elect him in the upcoming elections, re-elect him as prime minister, he will now have a mandate to shut down the army, shut down the intelligence services, shut down the judiciary, and make it resemble what the Pakistani people want. So this could be a revolutionary moment, but all revolutions come with a cost, and it could lead to a huge increase in violence. Remember, there is an active Pakistani Taliban. There's a Baluch independence movement. There's other entities that are that have Islamist affiliations, and if you weaken the army and weaken security services, these elements will take advantage. So you could see massive terrorism, violence, death, and Khan may not survive that. So, we could be watching the actual self-destruction of Pakistan, and the thing that should scare you to death is that's the self-destruction of a nation that possesses somewhere around 50 to 60 nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and that has largely been a U.S. ally up until, where this moment where the United States did not like that Imran Khan met with Vladimir Putin and said, no, Russia isn't our enemy. But Scott, did you have anything else that you wanted to say to the audience? Any updates on where we can find your work, anything like that?
You can't find my work on Twitter because I've been banned. So I'm working on what the next step is. If there's going to be a next step. I mean, sometimes the best thing to do is just go straight to the source. So if your internet server will allow you to go to Russia Today, I publish 2 or 3 articles a week there. Censorship News is another outlet that I like to publish in. And, who knows, I may set up a Telegram account and start putting my stuff up there. I don't know. This Twitter suspension has taken me by surprise. I never really intended to be on Twitter. It was my daughter actually built the account, and it sort of took on a life of its own. And now that life has ended, I'll figure something out. I'm not losing too much sleep over it. I think I laugh because it's only Twitter, but it's also free speech. It's also the reality that whatever you think of Twitter, and you can belittle it, 288 characters a time of self-important people putting out tweets as if they were God. But the reality is Twitter is a forum that many influential people use. And it gives people an opportunity to interact, to engage in the kind of debate, discussion, and dialogue that makes democracy what it is. And by removing voices that don't conform to, the mainstream narrative, you're weakening Twitter as a viable platform of informed interaction.
Yeah, and also, Scott, I just wanted to say you have a Telegram where you put out a lot of information as well. So if people want to check out his work, it's on Telegram. Scott, thank you so much for coming on here. I mean, I could talk forever about what your work has been and what you've been doing. So thank you for sharing that and for speaking truth, because at any given moment, any one of us could be gone from any social media, YouTube. We've been censored as well. I lost my Twitter account. I got it back, but who knows how long that will be for. So thank you for coming on and talking with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.